Okay, now we're live again.
Okay.
Should we do introductions again?
We have to start all over.
Hello, my name's Shannon. Brian.
Yeah. Anyways, so yeah, we're having technical issues. YouTube did something crazy to us. We don't know. I didn't touch anything, I swear.
Sure.
Shannon didn't touch anything. Ryan, I don't think he did anything. So who knows? But anyway, as you were saying, you were just talking about yourself, I think, a little bit.
Yeah, I like to talk about myself.
We talk about you all the time.
Yeah. So yeah, I have my doctorate in biology. My degree was in nutritional physiology. Did a little work in kind of animal research, kind of more in ecology setting, and some work in humans looking at water metabolism. But really, when I was in graduate school, I became kind of obsessed with endurance sports. And because of my just general nerdiness and research background, applied kind of that research ranger mentality to everything I was doing. Because anybody who does anything long distance, you realize the importance of nutrition pretty quickly. So yeah, I've done a whole range, whether it's, I've done the Leadville 100 mountain bike, I've done some 50-mile trail runs, I've done Ironman, I've done a bunch of stuff. Always been a climber. And now I'm obsessed with jiu-jitsu, so I spend a lot of time.
Oh yeah, I saw your a Facebook post you had about that. It was in, was that in Seattle?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I still will always run. I'll still always climb. I just kind of spend a little bit more time doing that. Some strength training too. Just keeping it fresh.
Yeah,
trying new stuff. Yeah.
You actually, so you mentioned something earlier. You were talking about how, like, in the last few years, last 5 years, let's say, there's sort of been a focus in the outdoor community, mountain athlete community, let's say, on nutrition.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the rise of Gnarly. I think there's been a similar sort of phenomenon happening with training theory for mountain athletes too. It used to be like, as climbers, if you want to be better at climbing, you just go climbing more, right? And then, but now all of the big routes have pretty much been done. All of the big peaks have already been done. So now that I feel like in climbing, especially, Ryan, I don't know what you think, Ryan, but the sport's changed a little bit. People are trying to do stuff faster. They're trying to do it in better style. And then there's, ultra running. I guess runners have kind of always taken training more seriously, but as climbers, I feel like we haven't for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you see things like Silence put up, 515D that in order to accomplish something like that, he's not just climbing.
Right. Yeah, it's not going to, yeah.
No, he's doing a lot more. I think for performance reasons, definitely training, nutrition, all those things come into play. But then also as, we age and we want to continue to do the things that we love doing, but longevity is also important. We want to do them as long as possible.
Right.
Making sure that we have proper nutrition and, supporting muscle groups to kind of avoid overuse injuries. Like, those are all really important, and it's great to see the outdoor community recognizing the importance of those things.
Right. So for me, over the last 3 or 4 years or so, I've gotten more serious about how I train for the stuff that I do. Part of that's just because once I turned 40, I noticed that I couldn't get away with just getting off the couch and running a half marathon as easily I used to, And there's some big stuff. Ryan and I climb together and stuff. We're actually headed up to the Grand here next week, right?
Nice.
Yeah, about a week. So that approach into the lower saddle on the Grand Teton is kind of a bear. And I could get off the couch and just hike into it, but I prefer not to suffer as much. So I'm sort of taking training more seriously. And I find that as I age, I really have to. I have to approach it with more discipline. And but one thing that is a mystery to me, and I'm sure I'm not alone, is it's not, I wouldn't say it's a mystery, but I feel like there's too much for lack of a better word, there's just too much BS out there when it comes to nutrition. And there's too many voices saying too many things. And it's really hard to know, like, how much of it is actually based in science and how much of it is just based in energy and crystals, I guess. You know what I mean? Like, not that there's necessarily anything wrong with that, but I just prefer more of science-based approach myself for that.
Yeah. I mean, so as a company, I'll just say this, like, whether it's supplements or it's you should be on X diet because it's going to make you a better athlete, we don't necessarily stand on any kind of nutrition soapbox and preach you should be vegan or you should be paleo or you should be keto. We try to make high quality products that as many people as possible can use. So we have a whey product, but beyond our whey protein, all of our products are vegan because we can make them vegan. None of our products contain fairy dust, or crystal shavings or anything like that.
They might have energy though. They might have energy.
Yeah. I mean, and so we can, as we get into more specific questions, talk about why they're formulated the way they are and how to use them. But just generally as a company, I always like to kind of point that out. Like, we test all of our products for gluten, not because we are anti-gluten, but because a lot of people have opinions about gluten or have serious medical issues where they can't consume gluten. So it's an easy way to make our products accessible to more people by excluding that protein.
So, okay, so as so kind of going down, let's just start in from the beginning. I think I started using your protein product about a year ago or so. Ryan, pretty much this week's the first time you've ever.
This past weekend was the first time I've ever used any kind of supplement product like that.
And you're a little bit more on the skeptic side, right? Like, you're more.
I want to know what's going in, So for me, Shannon, the first time I used it was I was going to run some high mountain stuff this past weekend, and I took a whey shake before I left early in the morning, and honestly, like, I don't know if it was just me feeling good or being out there, but like, I felt like I definitely felt solid the entire time.
You didn't feel hungry
I didn't feel hungry. Like, I felt charged the whole time. I felt like I could have kept going. Now, like, I don't know how much of that, because I've never taken it before, like, I don't know how much of that is the product or if I was just having like a good
and I would say, like, relative to what? So what do you take before runs previously? Do you
5 donuts and a Dr. Pepper?
A few pieces of bacon. I usually try to, like, load up on calories before I'll go out. So kind of whatever I have on hand, I won't go crazy. But so typically if I'm going out for a run, I usually don't even take anything before I go out. That's kind of like how I've done it. Is I like to keep it kind of chill before I leave. But I thought I'd try it. I was like, well, I know it's going to be a long day, so and I felt great. And that's kind of like where I'm trying to, like, and I think the normal person is going to be like, well, what's the balance? Like, how much? And this is like me being a complete idiot when it comes to this stuff and not knowing anything and this is like who you might want to preach to, is like a person who, I go out and I do a bunch of stuff, but I've just never taken anything and I don't know anything about it.
I think it's pretty much our team, with the exception, I know Shiva, because of her CrossFit exposure, those people tend to get into this stuff a little more than the rest of us have. But I mean, I guess the question is, from Ryan, would be like, is that an appropriate use of protein, for example?
Yeah, so a couple comments. So one, with the protein, ideally, I usually tell people to take the BCAAs before, like if it's in the 20 to 30 minute range beforehand, but if it's in the hour, 90 minutes to 2 hours, and your body has enough time to digest the protein, and we can talk about BCAAs and protein and how they work together in a minute. But if you did it with that much time prior, then your body would have enough time to digest it, which would be great. As a company, we always say whole foods first. So we are not supplement pushers by any means. I don't use all of our supplements all the time either. We see them as products of convenience. When Whole Foods either are something that you can't get your hands on or don't make sense in terms of a timing window. So bacon or whatever you normally have before you consume, you know, you've got to masticate, you've got to chew it up to break it down, then you've got to swallow it, then it takes more time to digest. So it takes more time to get the nutrition in your whole foods into your body. So if you are fueling yourself with a great enough time window, then whole foods totally make sense in that context. But if your time window is much shorter, something that's a liquid supplement, that's a protein in the hour and a half to 2 hours beforehand is going to be more easily digested by your body. And if your time window is even shorter, BCAAs, which are kind of like the super amino acids in high quality proteins, they're absorbed in 20 to 30 minutes. And so that is an even more convenient way to get that in your body. So if that makes sense, it's kind of like a sliding scale. And if Whole Foods works for you and you have the time to make it happen, I'd recommend that first and foremost.
Okay. So the whey protein, like I was reading up on that, and so to typically take that try like within a half an hour, right?
Well, so, okay, typically how I recommend, and we can, I'll give my recommendation and then kind of go into the reason why, and I think it's going to answer some of the questions you sent me, Alex. So we typically recommend, and this is true for most sports, that you sandwich your training in between BCAAs and protein. So ideally, an athlete wants to get about 20 to 30 grams of protein separated by 3 to 4 hours over the course of the day. Research has shown that your body can't really make use of more than 20 to 30 grams in terms of building new muscle or preventing muscle breakdown. The rest of it's used as energy. So if you take 40 grams, it's not that 40 grams of protein is bad, but you don't see any boost over the regular 20 to 30 gram dose. And that 3 to 4 hours keeps the amino acids that are responsible for those muscular benefits at kind of that saturation level across the whole day. So they've done studies where they've taken the same amount of protein and they divided it into like 2 big meals at either end of the day, or broken it up and dispersed it, separate in meals separated by just an hour, or broken it up in meals separated by 3 to 4 hours. So the amount of protein consumed in each of those groups is the same, but they see the highest muscle protein synthesis in the group that consumes that 20 to 30 grams every 3 to 4 hours. So ideally, as an athlete that's training for Pikes Peak and probably putting in a lot of miles, a lot of elevation, potentially breaking down a lot of muscle, if you were fueling on whole food, that is what you should do. You should have 20 to 30 grams of protein separated by 3 to 4 hours over the course of the day. And that would amount to, depending on the person, anywhere from like 4 to 6 meals. So 3 meals and then some snacks in between, depending on what else you're doing, how active you are, or how hungry you are. That sometimes doesn't work out.
Sure.
And that's where BCAAs come in, because BCAAs, so proteins made up of amino acids. There are essential and non-essential amino acids. Essential amino acids we have to get from our diet. Our body cannot synthesize them. So BCAAs are 3 of the 9 essential amino acids, and they're the special amino acids because instead of being broken up by the liver, they go straight to the muscle and do those things that I just mentioned. So they can help prevent muscle protein breakdown. So there's a lot of research showing that BCAA supplementation helps reduce what's called DOMS, or delayed onset muscle soreness, which is that like 2 to 3 days out, you can't walk down the stairs.
Right.
Yeah, we're all familiar with that.
I was just remarking internally to myself, as I've been training and using some of this stuff myself, I do notice that I don't really get that so much at this point in time. Yeah.
Good. That's good to hear. And then they can also help turn on muscle protein synthesis, which is basically your muscle reacting to the training stimulus and building more functional muscle mass. And so in high quality proteins like whey or like pea protein, if you're looking for a vegan or vegetable based option, they are high in branched chain amino acids. So there are 3: leucine, isoleucine, and valine. And so you could just, if you consume protein every 3 to 4 hours, you could just consume a high quality protein and you get those amino acid levels to their saturation point in your body. But sometimes consuming protein right before training is too heavy on your stomach. It takes too long to digest, whether from a whole food or even like a protein supplement. And so it's not going to get into your system as quickly. So that's where BCAAs come in handy. Research shows that free-form amino acids, and BCAAs in particular, are absorbed in about 20 to 30 minutes. And so by having them in your system when you're training, you help prevent that excessive muscle protein breakdown, which helps reduce the delayed onset muscle soreness. By following up with a whole protein, the BCAAs can also help turn on, to some extent, muscle protein synthesis, but you need kind of the whole assortment of amino acids to actually build new muscle. The BCAAs can turn it on, but you need the full range of aminos to build it. And so that's why we recommend, some people recommend BCAAs after training, and I'd say it's better to take a whole protein or a proteination or a meal rich in protein after training.
Okay. And then your formula has caffeine. I have your bottle right here.
Yeah, we have a decaf version as well.
Oh, what's that? Oh, you do?
Have a decaf version as well, yeah.
One we have, the one that I'm using, I think has caffeine. So I've actually avoided it if I'm within a couple, 2-3 hours of going to bed. I usually do my runs right after work around 3 or 4 p.m.
Yep.
And I've been doing these about, just like you're suggesting, about 30 minutes ahead of time. And then when I get home, I usually do some kind of a protein shake right away. And normally, I could wait. Sometimes I'll do it before bed, but usually I'm pretty hungry by then. So I just kind of do that to stave off hunger until I have, whatever I'm having for dinner. That's kind of like the main thing I've been using.
Yep.
And then I do the hydration. I'm using that. I'm drinking that about an hour or so before my workout, or just if I just feel dehydrated, like after a big run or something like that, I'll use that stuff too.
Yep.
So I don't know if that's for a runner, it seems like the way to go, but
yeah, so sandwiching just like you're doing with the BCAAs and protein, and the hydrate really, we recommend it kind of the strategic hydration plans more as runs get longer and where you're sweating more and losing more electrolytes. And the way our product is formulated, it's not really a fuel source. It's more about efficiently transporting water across your gut. So it does contain some sugar because there are pumps in your gut called sodium glucose pumps that when they're activated, more water is passed from your gut into your bloodstream. And so having some sugar to a small extent helps with that. And then, of course, replacing the electrolytes that you lose when you sweat. Primarily, you lose sodium. So it has the highest concentration of sodium. Product also has magnesium and chloride and potassium. But in reality, if you're using some kind of an electrolyte product, whether it's a tab or another brand, sodium should be your primary factor. So when everybody was like, oh, coconut water, it's nature's hydrator. Like coconut water is really rich in potassium, has like no sodium in it.
Yeah, and it doesn't taste as good if you put a tablespoon of salt in it.
No. So, now there are products that are like coconut water based that have salt added to them. So I just would make sure that if you're using coconut water as your like hydration product, that it has salt in it.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah. And that's so Scott Johnston, who has one of the authors of the Uphill Athlete book, was my coach for a little while, and that's one thing. He doesn't really. I know his coaches don't really go into nutrition a lot, but that is the one thing that he did kind of highlight in his advice to me is just just to like stay on some kind of electrolyte.
Yeah. So. Yeah. So, that's an important thing to remember. There are products out there that are fuel and electrolytes all together. Like an example would be Tailwind. Tailwind's a great product and it works for a lot of people. It also, when you start mixing fuel and electrolytes, you get closer to the line of potentially causing gut distress. And so Tailwind doesn't cause that for the majority of people.
Right.
I've heard from a lot of people they love it. They use that product exclusively. But I've also heard a lot of people that say that it sent them to the bathroom. And that's because, that kind of gradient between whether or not your body sees something as too concentrated or not concentrated enough differs from person to person.
Right.
So
sure.
essentially what I'm talking about is when your body sees something with a lot of stuff in it, it thinks it needs to dilute all of that stuff.
Okay.
So when you take something that has a ton of sugar in it, your body actually shunts water into your digestive system. And that's why things that are really rich in sugar can send you to the porta potty. You'll spend a lot of time there. When you take a goo packet, you always want to down a bunch of water with that goo, because your body sees that as a really concentrated sugar solution. And it will spend your body water to dilute that, which will dehydrate you and give you gut issues.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I've used Tailwind. A challenge that I personally have, especially on long days in the mountains, is eating. I have a hard time forcing myself to eat enough.
Yeah.
And so Tailwind is one thing that I've used in the past because it's easier to drink calories for me than it is to eat them. Yeah. And I haven't had any bowel distress.
So then it works great for you. And we're actually developing kind of our own version, a little bit different. That would be more of a fuel source than our current product. But yeah, so if you were taking our product as your hydration source, you would need calories from another source. So from a solid, and solids work for some people and they don't work for others. For me, it was always more of when I was running a lot, more of kind of a mental, like I wanted to choose something and eat something. But, I think really what it comes down to is finding out what works for you and your training, and then being pretty diligent about practicing that strategy on all long runs.
Yeah. So as far as long runs go, so we have the half marathon, kind of the trail half. I think I'm going to be on the course for probably 2 hours and change. Probably 2 hours, 30 minutes or something. Have you figured out how long? No.
Gonna ask.
He's just gonna go for it. He's gonna kick my ass, actually. But so what about that? Like, so should I probably do? I mean, are BCAAs going to help really there beforehand? Is that still the strategy you would pursue, or would you do? It's going to be super early, so usually I drink a protein shake early in the morning as my breakfast anyway. Was that a reasonable course to take? And then as far as on the course, knowing that I can't eat calories as easily, like I probably will do goo, and then should I do hydration, like electrolyte with it, or should I just stick to water with that?
So good questions. So one, if you're doing protein beforehand, you probably don't need to do BCAAs. So that gets kind of back to they achieve the same goal. BCAAs are just kind of a shortcut if you don't have the time to get that high quality protein in beforehand. So there you go. No on that. If you've been training with goo and that works for you, then continue using that and using the hydrate if that combination of things works for you. We can get into fat adaptation training. Some of the questions you sent me were regarding that, and I am a big fan of that. But you need to spend some time kind of training to optimize that metabolically before you can just like decide that that's going to be a strategy. But you telling me that you're not really good at eating while you're running, that seems like getting one of the benefits of being fat adapted is that you don't have to take in as much food because your calories you have on hand. And so you can kind of, if you're not good at eating, or if you get a lot of gut distress when you eat, it kind of minimizes the threat of those two things. But yeah, typically for longer races, I recommend people do a sweat test. I don't know if you guys have ever done that to determine.
I've done that.
So it's pretty easy to do, and it really just looks at your water loss. And I'd say for a 2.5 hour run, probably not necessary. This would be kind of for longer periods. But you just, over an hour, you weigh yourself, naked before your run, then you go out for an hour run. You probably don't drink anything during that hour, but if you do drink, make sure you know how many ounces. And then you weigh yourself after, and for every pound of body weight lost, that's approximately equal to 16 ounces of fluid. So if you lost a pound of body weight and then you consumed 4 ounces of water during that hour, you would want to replace with about 20 ounces of water hourly.
There's no way I'm drinking enough water.
Yeah.
There's no way.
No, and so the point is that becomes an impact on longer races when you're sweating a lot.
Well, I'm thinking about climbing objectives.
Drinking to thirst, for anything in the 2 hour range, 2 hours or below, use thirst as an indicator would be my recommendation. Okay. It's really when you get into longer distances, when you're sweating a lot and you're losing electrolytes on a regular basis, that it starts catching up with you, that you need to be a little more diligent about making sure you're getting in that water and those electrolytes regularly.
Okay, that makes sense. I want to, if we can change gears a little bit, let's
sure. With climbing really quick and hydration.
Yeah.
That seem like it's important, but being hydrated is one of the things that kind of protects your tendons. And tendon health is obviously really important for climbing. So just also make sure that you drink if you're at the crag all day. It's important.
Right. And that's actually a really good tip, because are you good at drinking?
I drink a lot of water.
Yeah. I usually, I'm getting better, but I don't know why. When I'm actually out doing stuff, it's harder for me.
Whenever we go running, I'm always the one that has the water.
Yeah, that's right.
Hey, Ryan, can I have some water?
Called a pack mule.
See how I did that? That's smart. Oh, that's funny. Not really for Ryan though. Okay, so the thing that you gave us to try out was your runner stack, and that's the 3 products that we've been talking about. So just like real quick, I think we mostly went with vanilla protein, but you guys do a chocolate and you do a vegan. You do vegan chocolate and vegan vanilla separately, or is it just vegan?
It's chocolate and vanilla separately, and the vegan's more of a meal replacement, so it's higher in calories, a little bit higher. It's got 7 grams of fat, 9 grams of fiber, vitamin mineral mix, so it's kind of more of an all-in-one.
Okay, and then you already pointed out the BCAAs we have they're caffeinated, but you sell them uncaffeinated as well.
In just the one berry lemonade flavor, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. The rest. What are the other flavors?
So there's lemon, lime, and fruit punch as well.
All right, and then and then this one. Let's see. Got the hydrate here. So we have the orange pineapple, but I don't remember which other flavors are for those. But
grapefruit. It's my favorite. Oh. It's not like a sour grapefruit. It's really good.
That sounds good. I'll have to try that next time around.
It mixes really well with tequila and lime as well.
I'll keep that in mind.
So you do that before you run?
Yeah. That's more like a mid-workout thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's that. I haven't checked in with the other folks yet. I was hoping Shiva would join us, but because we had that kerfuffle with Facebook Live, she may not have been able to find us. I'm not sure, but hopefully she'll weigh in later. And we'll write I got some blog content coming up, so I'll kind of sum some of this conversation up, and I'll probably run it by you just to make sure I'm not lying before I actually publish it.
Okay.
And then, okay, so as far as nutrition, we've kind of you've already said that you guys just recommend like a whole food diet. I think a lot of people's skepticism or reluctance to get into supplements there's a few things that you hear. I think one of them is, especially for runners and climbers, is I don't want to get all bulky, or I don't want to be all flatulent, or I just eat food, and so I don't need that stuff. Those are like kind of the comments you hear why people wouldn't want to mess around with supplements. And I think I was probably in that camp for a while. But the thing that turned me around was that I mean, I work a job like everybody, and I don't always eat that great. So it was kind of a way for me to kind of force myself to at least one meal a day is pretty much a no-brainer, and that's breakfast. So that's kind of how I started into it. What would you say about some of that stuff?
Yeah, so I mean, as I said before, we agree whole foods first, but there are definitely, even with whole foods, like we talked about, consuming protein consistently throughout the day, that you might be consuming a whole foods diet, but you're not consuming it in a way that really supports your performance goals.
Right. Especially if you happen to be vegan, you may not be getting all of the amino acids you need if you're not actually paying attention to that too.
Yeah, so as an aside to that, just to give you a little story, so Steph Davis is obviously vegan. She's not one of our athletes. We can't afford to really pay any of our athletes. So the athletes that work with us because they love our products. But she, my husband knows her, and we have another athlete that's really good friends with her, and they had been like pestering her to try the BCAAs, and she's very not a big fan of supplements, very whole foods based. But she finally was like, okay, I'll try the BCAAs. And she had this amazing experience with them where there's this specific workout that she does that involves like lifting, deadlifts, and then she goes out and does this run, and she's always wrecked from it and super sore. And I don't know that she wasn't sore, but the difference between how she normally feels and how she felt with the BCAAs was staggering. And part of that is that she is vegan. And while you can get high quality vegan proteins, it's much harder to get, and it's much harder to get consistently. And so having the BCAAs as kind of this like acute dose right before she trained, and then following up with, the whole food she normally consumed made a huge difference for her. And we tried to get her on as an athlete, but she's very devoted to the brands that support her for good reason. So we're like, well, we just would like to continue sending you product. And she made this amazing Instagram post for us. It was just like a surprise, basically proclaiming like this miraculous, impact that she had ever since being on this product. So yes, the product, like even if you consume meat or fish, the product can help if you're not consuming protein in an ideal way for an athlete. But particularly if you're a vegan or a vegetarian, where it's a little more challenging, it's not that you can't do it, but it's more challenging. You have to be more on it to get enough protein and high quality proteins consistently throughout the day. That can also be a benefit to using something like BCAAs or something like a vegan protein.
Okay. That reminds me of Kristen. Because remember how we have a friend named Kristen. She used to be vegetarian, and I remember she used to struggle with just having to constantly eat when we were in the mountains together. She's just like eating the whole time pretty much. And she added animal protein back into her diet. But I wonder if she couldn't have just stayed vegetarian and just added some supplements instead.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, one thing to note with BCAAs is there are vegan and non-vegan BCAAs. Ours are vegan. The non-vegan ones, if you're a vegan and want to consume vegan products, it's important to make sure the product you're consuming identifies them as vegan. They're typically sourced from, weirdly enough, duck feathers. Yeah, I know, it's weird. But feathers and hair are like a concentrated, cheap source of amino acids.
Interesting, huh? That doesn't sound as palatable as berry lemonade, but good to know. What about, we've kind of gone through, without like stating our questions, we've kind of gone through a lot of them already. Ryan, you had, did you kind of get your question answered about timing on the stuff?
Yeah, so Shannon, you were saying pretty much the whey protein, it's best to use that anytime, like exceeding an hour and a half prior to a workout then, so you have time to kind of get that through your system and feel like you're ready to go. And then if it's within a half an hour, you should use the BCAAs.
Yep, and if you get that protein in an hour and a half to 2 hours, you might not need the BCAAs. You know, some people might choose that they want, but I would say you wouldn't need to.
Okay.
What about so Shiva asked a question specifically about CrossFit. It's kind of, I think I know the answer already, but I'll just pose it. So with regard to a CrossFit or more of a some type of a strength workout, would your advice pretty much be the same for that type of activity?
Yeah, it would be. It's interesting. There's a lot of research looking at what protein intake does in strength athletes versus what protein intake does in more endurance-based athletes. And although, this training stimulus is different, the training stimulus is different, and so the function that the protein plays is different. In strength athletes, if they're consuming protein in the right way, and their workout supports it, you see gains in muscle mass. In endurance athletes, you see increases in mitochondria, which are like the power of oxygen powerhouses in your muscles. And you see increases in the enzymes that help kind of your body produce ATP versus via aerobic respiration. So you don't see, this is kind of back to your question, you don't see this, or your comment earlier, this like huge gain in muscle mass in endurance athletes simply because they're supplementing with protein. To build muscle mass, you have to eat just more total calories, not necessarily, the protein intake has to be there, but you have to really consume a lot more calories for your body to put on mass, and you have to be in a very specific training regimen that supports the building of that muscle.
Right. Okay.
So a real quick question, talking about the timing. We talked about kind of the 0 to 2 hour window for working out, right? It's like running and all that kind of stuff, like anything sub that. What about, so you said like 4 to 6 hours of protein, trying to keep it at that rate. So if you're out for like 8 hours, would you recommend taking like some more BCAAs at like 5 hours or something if you know you're going to be out there for another 5? Or
yeah, so I would never sacrifice taking in like electrolytes for BCAA intake. So electrolytes and just fluid should be your first priority. But yeah, like you can get in BCAAs, and if your pace is slow enough, if you're doing kind of more of a like alpine style ascent and you have enough time and you're not working so hard that taking in kind of more complex foods is a problem, then yeah, you should be refueling kind of with protein and fat as well. Carbohydrates, depending on how you've used them and what your diet looks like. But yeah, we have a lot of athletes that do that on longer runs that take BCAAs halfway for that exact reason.
Yeah, like my go-to is typically like if I bring those like little salmon packets. So like down a salmon packet, like pretty much when I'm only 3/4 of the way through or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so that, I mean,
sodium and like all that kind of stuff too.
Yep.
But
your body can't really use protein for energy. It only uses amino acids for energy when your glycogen stores are so low that it's like going nuts to find anything, and then it can turn amino acids into glucose. Really, your two primary fuels are going to be fat and carbohydrates, and the preference of the body to use one or the other is tied to how hard you're working or intensity. There's more and more research coming out. Like they used to say that at really high intense activities, you're using pretty much exclusively carbohydrate, and fat gets burned more at lower intensities. There's more and more research coming out suggesting that we do use fat, even we use carbohydrates to a greater extent, but we do still use some fat at high intensities. But the one big thing to consider is that you don't necessarily have to take in fat. Like even the leanest of us has enough fat stored to fuel you. So you should still be taking in carbohydrates as that like external fuel source, and you should have built fat adaptation into your training so that your body can use those fats as fuel. If
on carbs, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So if the protein works for you, Ryan, then you should stay with what works for you. But just so you know, like that protein will be benefiting you by increasing BCAAs in your body because salmon protein's high in BCAAs and will help with soreness. Your body's actually going to be using very little of that to fuel what you're doing.
Well, salmon's a pretty fatty fish, but
Yeah.
I mean, how quickly do we process fat and something like that compared to, say, sugar or whatever? Like, sugar would be it'd be much easier to replenish glycogen rather than replenish. If there's no need to replenish the fat, really.
There's no need to replenish the fat.
So okay. But then on the other hand, that's probably really filling for you, though.
Yeah, I mean, on things like that are really so one benefit of fat, right, is it's really calorically dense. So protein and carbohydrates have 4 calories per gram. Fat has 9 calories per gram. So if you're looking for something that, like, if you're doing an alpine ascent of some, and you're trying to really minimize your weight and increase the amount of calories that you're getting, fat makes a great fuel. But in kind of the context of what we're talking about and the type of training that we're talking about, I don't necessarily see taking in fat as an external fuel source as having any other benefit than you like it and it feels good for you. Everybody's different, so I'd never like draw these like mass conclusions and say you shouldn't be doing it. A lot of people love those nut butter things, but personally, and from the research that I've read, it makes much more sense either through increasing fat in your diet, through doing long, slow distance and increasing your cardiovascular efficiency in your body's, set point for burning fat, or by doing fasted runs. Those are the 3 major ways that you can increase your body's ability to use fat as a fuel. And so if you can kind of get that dialed and then top it off with carbohydrates and pay attention to replacing electrolytes and water, that for me is the ideal.
What's a typical like a realistic time frame in your experience for getting a good level of fat adaptation going in your body? I don't know I imagine there's probably a big range and has a lot of variables, but
yeah, I mean, I would do I don't really know of a time frame. I would be doing all of those things. The long, slow distance is like monotonously slow, and that is something that you should be doing in your off season.
Okay. So where I'm at with my training right now, I've moved my my aerobic threshold is to within 10% of my anaerobic threshold. So now, in order to be running in what you would call heart rate zone 2, I would actually be having to run faster than my muscles are adapted to run. So those workouts are going to be too hard at that speed, and I'm not going to recover. So what I actually am doing those long, slow, like almost all my volume is zone 1 at this point, but but now I'm doing starting to add in more high intensity stuff. So I don't know if I could do a 2-hour run on no food. I don't know if I'm there yet, but I'm already starting to do just like one. Like this morning, I did a fasted run for just like an hour.
In that zone 2.
In zone 1, actually.
In zone 1. Perfect. Yeah. So I mean, so in that example, you're combining 2 of those strategies. Okay. So your body's gonna adapt faster than someone that's just doing a fasted run, but is not paying attention to what zone they're in and whether or not their muscles are metabolically ready to switch over.
Okay.
I really, to be honest, don't have a time frame. It's just, I think, something to always work on. I mean, I think it takes a long time to kind of build up, obviously, to be Kilian Jornet and build up,
Sure.
the kind of gut edit.
I guess I'm hesitant. I usually bring goo, and I don't know, the goo that I use usually has caffeine. So, like, I usually do 3 during a 2-hour workout. I'll do like 3 of those sometimes.
Yep.
Or maybe if it's like 2.5 hours, I'll do like 3 of them. But I wonder if it's actually, and I do notice like energy comes back and stuff, and it gets easier again. But I wonder if it's really the caffeine that's doing that more than.
So I mean, it's a little different if you're fasted. So are you doing these in the morning then?
Yeah, usually. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But I usually do. I can't remember if I did the last one. I guess I did do the last one fasted.
Okay. So when you wake up, your liver glycogen is pretty much spent, and that's what builds up your blood glucose. But you still have muscle glycogen in your body. I'm not exactly sure how much that is versus the liver glycogen, but when you're not fasted, you typically have enough glycogen on board to fuel 60 to 90 minutes of exercise. So, if we cut that like in half-ish, then you're looking at 30 to 45 minutes that your body still has glycogen stores that it's using from your muscular glycogen.
Mm-hmm.
That can also differ depending on what your diet looks like. If you're on some crazy low-carb diet, then that might not be the case because you're living in a glycogen depleted state. But if you're eating a pretty normal diet, you should have enough to fuel 30 to 45 minutes after waking up.
Yeah.
And if you're running at that low enough, at that zone 1, because of your intensity or low intensity, your body should predominantly be burning fat anyways.
Right.
So okay. I would try caffeine without the goo.
That's what it makes me think is it's really just it's just just a perception, just a mental thing, just getting used to it. Probably. I wonder does, like, if you're consciously working towards fat adaptation, do those long workouts become easier without those carbs?
In my personal experience, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's good to know.
Yeah.
And then I'll eat.
I'm also a big believer
get done.
As soon as intensity kicks up a little bit, then I kick up my carb intake as well.
Okay. That makes sense. I mean, I guess we've covered pretty much everything, and we were actually a little bit over time. So, is there any territory for endurance athletes specifically you feel like we skipped over or didn't focus on enough?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the one thing that we didn't chat about too much is the importance of the carbohydrates after as well.
Yeah. Right.
And so making sure when you're getting that protein, you're also getting carbohydrates. Kind of the sweet spot is that 3-to-1 to 4-to-1 carb to protein ratio. So if you're getting in your 20 grams of protein, then that looks at like 60 to 80 grams of carbohydrate. 60 grams of carbohydrate is about 240 calories, and 80 grams is about 320 calories. So it'll give you an idea of what your and this is for longer training days, right? You wouldn't obviously need to take in that many calories after a 1-hour run. You could take in smaller amounts of protein and smaller amounts of carbs. But when you're really glycogen depleted because you were just on a long run, then taking in that kind of carbohydrate will replenish those glycogen stores. And some research shows that beyond the benefits of taking protein alone, taking protein with glycogen or with the carbohydrate improves the
absorption,
or the repletion of those glycogen stores. So, and a lot of people always ask, like, do I have to take it in the hour after? No, you don't. If you miss that hour, there's still benefit in taking it 2 hours. But as a rule of thumb, I just try to tell people the closer you can get within reason to taking it.
Well, there's like what I've read is there's like a 30-minute golden window where it's the easiest for you to absorb everything the way you do.
But it's not a huge drop off from there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, I mean, my takeaways are that Ryan should continue to hydrate with Dr. Pepper and tequila.
Bacon.
Carry all of your water.
Right. You carry all of my water.
Well, the big takeaway I got is mixing the tequila and lime.
Right.
with the-
Oh, actually, yeah. What's your so okay, I always like my go-to smoothie is like a banana, 2 ice cubes, a scoop of vicious vanilla, and I usually go for like an almond coconut milk blend to make it watery. Like what's your favorite or what's
I have two. Have you guys ever seen this stuff? It's like powdered peanut butter.
Oh yeah, I have some of that.
Yeah, so sometimes I'll add this to the vanilla, to the chocolate as well, but I really like it with the vanilla, and it just gives kind of a like that peanut buttery flavor, which I really like. And I'll just do that with water if I don't have access to a blender, and it's great. It also has a little bit more protein in it, and then
And it doesn't have all the fat that actual peanut butter has.
no, so it's like for two tablespoons, it's 1.5 grams.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's basically just dehydrated peanuts. So when they dehydrate the peanuts, the fat comes out.
Right.
And then, not that we should be afraid of fat. It's important.
Right. Within reason, yeah.
But then my like fancy one, if I have access to a blender, so I love the vanilla protein, and then I'll put in a banana or dates, one of the two, turmeric, ginger, and cinnamon. And it makes kind of this like golden milk. If you guys have ever had that flavor, it's really good. It's kind of this mix of spicy and sweet. And that recipe's on our website.
Okay. I'll put a link to that someplace when I share this.
Yeah, that's definitely hands down my favorite. If I'm have a little bit more time.
And I should mention too, just real quick for people who haven't strayed over there yet, but you guys have some amazing content over there on your blog too.
Yes.
So if anybody's looking for, a lot of this stuff is probably covered in there, but it's kind of, hopefully this will kind of condense some of the more common stuff in one place for folks, and then you can drill down into hydration or whatever. I saw I've spent a couple hours reading stuff over there, so.
Yeah, and if anybody has questions, I'm like my favorite thing to do is to help athletes with their nutrition. So email me.
Okay. We'll post cell phone number and home address. You can just
exactly. If I can like not do all the Excel spreadsheet stuff that I have to do,
right,
it's a good thing.
Yeah. So you were, I think before we went live, you were saying Gnarly is essentially a 3-person outfit and is growing to 6 people here.
Yep. We're going to be hiring kind of an events athlete person, someone for sales, and then digital marketer. So yeah, we've got some exciting things coming. We just signed a sponsorship with USA Climbing, so we're going to be working with them, and we're kind of going for this NSF for sports certification, which kind of validates label claims, make sure banned substances aren't in your products. But that's kind of like a longer process. So
sure,
some exciting things coming.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I'm kind of a super fan at this point. So you guys, I appreciate you. Keep doing your thing.
Thank you very much. And thanks. Yeah. Thanks for all the questions and the opportunity.
Of course.
All right.
Anything else?
I'm good.
All right. Let's go eat some protein.
Okay. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Take care.